Welcome to our new podcast, Partners in Prevention, Community Conversations with Laws, or PIP. So my name is Katherine Parker.
I'm Jen Farnsworth.
And this podcast is going to be where we break down the topics everyone's talking about, or some we aren't talking about enough, through the lens of prevention, respect, and community. So each episode, we'll be talking about things like healthy relationships, consent, gender stereotypes, bystander intervention, social norms, and all the ways that these topics show up in pop culture, the news, and our everyday lives.
So we'll also be bringing in guests and sharing community resources, discussing what's happening in the world, and helping make prevention conversations more accessible and relatable. So before we dive in, we'll just take a second to introduce ourselves. So let's start with you, KP. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Laws, your background, where you're from, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So my name is Katherine Parker. I use she, her pronouns. Like you guys have heard, people call me KP. Jen will call me KP
Yep.
probably throughout this podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm the violence prevention specialist here at Laws. I've been here for 3 years now, and I'm originally from Georgia. I moved up to Virginia from Georgia about 3 years ago for this job. And so I have degrees. I have a bachelor in sports management from the University of Georgia. I was a former swimmer. I was a student athlete on the swim and dive team. So that was the sport management degree. And
Mhm.
then eventually found my way into social work and got my master's in macro focus social work, also from the University of Georgia. So yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I totally missed that I called you KP from the beginning, but what I want to know what brought you into this field and then maybe what's something that keeps you passionate about primary prevention work.
I love that. Yeah. So for me personally, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. So for me, it was experiencing it in college, and it just really kind of opened my eyes going through the reporting process and my college's Title IX process on the overall systemic issues that go on with sexual assault, domestic violence, and specifically that prevention aspect of it. For me, I had great support services. I had great therapists and advocates there for me, but I really saw a lack of prevention work going on within my campus and within the surrounding area. And so for me, that's really what brought me into this field, was seeing there was so much work to be done. There's so many people that are survivors of sexual assault, and we'll cover in a little bit what that term means, but it is so common, especially among young adults. And so being able to get into this field and somehow act in a way to prevent that is what really brought me here. And keeping me passionate is just, I mean, the work that you and I do, Jen, is being out in the community. We do a lot of trainings and education in our jobs. And so a lot of the discussions that we have with people from all walks of life, all different organizations and areas within the community in Loudoun County. That's what really keeps me passionate. It's great to hear what people have to say about prevention and what they're seeing in the community. They're really fun conversations, and especially the youth, seeing youth activists so active and aware of what these issues are, what's going on in our society, and seeing their motivation to work towards preventing these acts of violence is truly something that keeps me going in this work.
Yeah. Yeah, we see so many. I think that's what gives us hope at the end of the day, right? There's so many hard things that are happening, but seeing the next generation of youth who are like, we're not going to stand for this and all of this, like, it's been really inspiring, especially here in Loudoun County. And like, these kids are a different type, like these, they're activists. They already have nonprofits, they're really ambitious. So yeah, I think that's definitely what gives me hope. And KP is so good at being passionate and bringing her passion to this work, especially from a survivor focus. So I really appreciate working with you and just, yeah, we need passion for this work.
Well, Jen, you are very passionate as well, and I'd love for you to share for everyone your background as well, and where you're from, degrees, and yeah, what brought you into this field as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the violence prevention manager at Laws. I've been here for 2 years now. I'll kind of work backwards, I guess. I got my master's degree in public health from George Washington University. So I came out to the East Coast from Utah, so I'm from far away, but I'm glad to be here. I really enjoyed living out here. But yeah, I started in maternal and child health, and that was my focus, throughout my undergrad and grad school, and then really shifted to violence prevention. I just feel so lucky to be in this job out of my first job out of grad school being something that I really am passionate about. And yeah, like you said, I think what brought me into this field is similar. Like I think most of us in this field have direct or indirect experiences with domestic violence and sexual assault. And just like you said, it's so pervasive and maybe even people who don't realize it have been affected in some way. But when I was in my undergrad, I was going through, learning about this. I was learning about public health and, how to prevent violence and all these things. And we'll talk about this later, but we were literally going through this tool called the power and control wheel. And well, I'm sure, yeah, we'll talk about that more, but it goes through all the ways that maybe there could be abuse or harm in a relationship. And I realized in that moment that I was in a harmful relationship. And I was just like, oh my gosh. It's so hard to see, when you're in the middle of something, and then looking back, hindsight is 2020. So anyway, it was just really eye-opening to me, and it's something that I wish I had access to all of this education and this learning that we give to people here in Loudoun every day. And I wish I had that when I was younger. So it's really fulfilling in that way. And yeah, I'm just glad to be here.
And I appreciate you for sharing that. And it's so we see that so much in the work that we do and the work that laws does as well as these people and the clients we work with, the general community, they may not know what they're going through is violence or is domestic violence or sexual assault until we come in with that education piece or they see that power and control wheel. And that's when it kind of clicks in their mind of, oh, this is literally happening to me right now. And the difficulty and the bravery that it takes to move beyond that acknowledgement and then having the courage to get out of that relationship. It is so difficult. So I really appreciate you sharing that and how
Mhm.
that brought you into this field. And I think a lot too, this is something that I've learned as well with our job. Sometimes when I'm telling people, they'll ask, where do you work or what do you do? And I say, I work at Laws, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services. So I'd love to hear from you, Jen. If there's something that people are surprised by when they learn about your job, where you work, the work that you do in general, when you tell them and let them know.
Yeah, I think this is a funny thing that comes up often even, with family members or, friends of I'll exactly like you said, I'll say, "Yeah, I work here," and they're like, "Oh, what does that mean?" Or and especially prevention, like what does a violence prevention specialist mean? And it's kind of like a niche area of social work and public health, and it's growing, which I'm really glad that it is. But sometimes people are like, "Are you a security guard?" Like, like what do you do? Or like crisis intervention, like so I think it's gentle education that we do, in all aspects of our job of like what do we do? So, yeah, I think people are surprised when I talk to them that it isn't that one-on-one intervention with people. We definitely, of course, like talk through things with our audience members, but it's more on that community and macro focus. I know, like you love the macro focus social work, right? That's what your degree is, and that's really what public health is all about too, is at that community level. So I think yeah, and we will for sure go into more about what prevention means, but I think it's not what you think, at least in the area that we are in at our agency, where it's like therapy or, the one-on-one counseling or more case management. It's really trying to bring awareness to this issue on a larger societal level. So, yeah, and I think sometimes that's even hard to grasp. So we'll talk more about that and kind of who we are and how prevention is weaved in throughout all of our services. So, yeah.
I was gonna say that was the perfect transition, Jen, into who we are at Laws. It is this kind of combination of that public health and that social work context of doing that direct work with clients, but also addressing those systematic issues that we're seeing that are causing these acts of violence to people. And it's always funny whenever Jen and I are out in the community and we'll ask people who's familiar with Laws, and some people will kind of look at us like, like the Constitution, like laws in general. And it's like, I understand that. So, for those who may not be familiar with our organization, we are with Law's Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services. So, we are located in Leesburg, Virginia. We were actually founded back in 1984 by three local women under the name Loudoun Citizens for Social Justice. So, if you see our email handles or even our website, LCSJ, that's where that comes from. And a lot of people even formally know us as the Loudon Abuse Women's Shelter. So that's where that acronym LAWS comes from. We actually changed our name back in 2022 to our full name, Laws Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Services, to reflect the fact that we serve all survivors, regardless of identity. And we recognize that domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, stalking, these are things that affect every single person, regardless of identity and who they are. And so we wanted to acknowledge that within our name so that everyone feels like this is an organization that is going to be safe to get services from. You're not going to be judged, and everything we do is for the safety of survivors.
Yeah, I think again, like there's things that we are constantly trying to educate the community about, and number one starts with our name, right? Because I think that's just like a big myth about domestic violence is that it only affects one gender. It's usually framed as males being the perpetrators and women being the victims, and that leaves out a lot of identities in between. And so, yeah, another thing that we try to gently educate about is that all of our services are comprehensive and they're free. So people are always asking like, how much does it cost for you to come do a workshop at my church or at, for the Girl Scouts or whatever it is? And we always say it's completely free. So all of our services, even our therapy, our legal team, everything is covered under we are mostly funded through government grants and also private grants and community sponsors. So everything is free, comprehensive, and we serve all survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual violence, family violence, child abuse, and stalking. So a lot of different areas that we try to service. So basically anything that happens, violence within a relationship, within an intimate relationship and family. Another thing is that we service all of Loudoun County. So even though we're based in Leesburg, we service all of Loudoun County. We provide services to all survivors. We meet everyone, and that's regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, immigration status, religion, you name it. Wherever you stand with your identity, we we are here to help, and we're a non-government agency. We work with government partners, but we're a nonprofit, and I think that's really important, especially in this time.
Yes, in this day and age, definitely. Yeah, we work with law enforcement and family services, child protective services, the school systems. Like we have a lot of partnerships that are amazing. But like Jen said, we are not a government agency. So we do not have to report things to government agencies. We are mandated reporters. So that is one thing that we do have to report, but that's in the sense of child abuse and elder abuse. So we do have three offices as well with laws. So we have our main office that's on East Market Street in Leesburg, which is where majority of our services are housed. We also have the Resourceful Women Thrift Store on Loudon Street in downtown Leesburg. So if you love to thrift, highly recommend. And we'll kind of get a little bit into what they do and where those funds go to as well. And then we also have our Child Advocacy Center. So that's located at the Inova Hospital Cornwall campus over in Leesburg. And then we also have our imminent danger shelter for those that are fleeing danger in the moment. And that is at an undisclosed location. So all of our services are some form of prevention. And we'll kind of get into what different levels of prevention include. But those services that we've mentioned, especially at the community services center. So we have court and hospital and community advocacy. So our court and community advocates are there to help with safety planning, crisis intervention, legal intakes, accompanying and going with survivors to court and hospital appointments, as well as just general emotional support and referrals. So they are there to assist walk-ins as well that may come into our office fleeing imminent danger. If there are advocates there in our office at the time, they will be there to support that survivor in the moment. We also have legal services within our within laws. We are the only domestic violence agency in the state of Virginia to have attorneys on staff. So this is a huge pro that we have laws and we're very thankful for. One of our attorneys is a protective order attorney, and the other works with family law. So they assist with filing protective orders, child custody and visitation, divorce, and even child and spousal support.
We also have amazing trauma therapists. So we have a youth trauma therapist and adult trauma therapist on staff that will do short-term trauma therapy to survivors. And that's to identify and really process the trauma that they've gone through and work on reducing some of those symptoms, whether it be PTSD or increasing resilience. We also offer support groups for adults and kiddos throughout the year, which is really exciting and huge, uh, just a huge strength to know that you're not alone. We do community outreach, so KP and I will sometimes go into the outreach area as well as a lot of our staff who just have expertise with different populations. So we'll have volunteers, our amazing volunteers will go out and table at events just to get our face out in the community. We'll do presentations about domestic violence 101 and what it means. And that kind of bleeds into our education and violence prevention, which is yours truly, Jen and KP, our small but mighty team of violence prevention. And we do those community trainings for businesses, for parents and caregivers, for educators, children, teens, really across the life course, because we know that that more repetitive education and saturation of these concepts is really what's going to move the needle in disrupting the cycle of domestic violence and sexual assault. So all of our trainings are tailored and age appropriate and strengths based. And we really strive to offer the best education for whatever group we're presenting to. And then, like KP was saying, we have our awesome thrift shop, The Resourceful Woman. I get most of my clothes from there, so it's a win-win. But all of our clients shop there for free, which is a huge boost, especially when, you're trying to maybe escape a dangerous situation and you need that help. And then all of the proceeds that do come from community members go to fund our laws programs. So really is a win-win with highly recommend.
We love
But
our resources.
yeah, that was a lot, right? That's a lot of our services, but KP, how about you help us break down a little bit of those definitions? Because sometimes we throw these things around all the time. We're swimming in it every day, but maybe people don't really know what domestic violence or sexual assault or all those things actually mean.
Yeah, I mean, even coming into this field, it was learning all the acronyms. It is a
Yeah.
lot of acronyms for us to remember. So, and each of these terms within our mission statement and even our organization name, there's so many things that each of those things cover. So, for example, domestic violence. When we think of domestic violence, it's really that pattern of behaviors that a partner is using to maintain, Jen, like you said, power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. And we've actually kind of tried to move away a little bit from that term domestic violence and move more towards intimate partner violence because of the fact that dating violence or domestic violence really has that heteronormative kind of cisgender male beating a female, male abusing a female kind of mindset that comes with it. And that is brought up when we think of domestic violence. And so, as we know, and as you've mentioned, everyone can be or anyone can be a victim of domestic violence, of intimate partner violence. And we want to recognize that. And changing the words that we use also have a very strong effect on that. So using the term intimate partner violence, so this also includes dating violence and emotional abuse. Jen and I mean, we work very closely with teen dating violence in the school system. So again, with the term domestic, we hear or we think of married couples that are living together in homes. And we really want to acknowledge the different relationships that come and the violence that can occur in those. We also work with sexual violence. So that's really the umbrella term for all the different forms of sexual contact or behavior that occurs without that explicit consent from someone else. So this can include rape, incest, non consensual touching, sexual harassment, and sex trafficking. And so this is an area that, I'm passionate about. I am very big on, and I one thing I really like about our services, and that even specifically you and I do, is really covering the intersectionality of the different forms of violence that we educate and we see in the community, and how things like intimate partner violence and sexual assault will overlap in these types of issues.
Yeah. And one thing I think too with sexual violence is, and something that we talk to kids and teens more and more is, does sexual violence have to be physical, right? And that's really under the sexual harassment piece of there is, a lot of verbal abuse that goes into that. There's the sexist jokes, there's the catcalling, that is sexual violence. There's, like you said, the non-consensual touching is, not just surrounding sex. It's about any touch that feels uncomfortable to you, that feels, beyond your romantic boundaries. So I think that's also something that we go into a lot of, sexual violence. We think of rape or incest, those extreme examples that we don't want. Obviously, we want to stop that before it gets to that point. So I think that's also something that we're trying to do. And we also service survivors of child abuse, right? So, and child abuse too, there's some myths around what that constitutes. That's when a child is harmed physically, sexually, psychologically, or by acts of neglect. And that also includes witnessing violence. So, if there is intimate partner violence happening in the home and a child witnesses it with their parents, or that's an act of child abuse. And then stalking, I think, is one of the more underrated and undereducated things that we talk about. Is stalking is really a pattern of behavior that's directed at a specific person that causes fear. So, and that can be fear of safety or if there's any emotional distress. So I know we can kind of think of like the person lurking in the bushes and tracking your location, right? Or the stranger who follows you home. But really, stalking can encompass so much, and that's something that we're trying to educate more and more on as well. So, obviously, that's a lot to take in, right? This is like the fire hydrant of all of the things that, that we encompass, but I think it's really, our organization is built on the belief that these behaviors, even though they're so pervasive, don't have to be normal and everyday, right? And that we really believe that they're preventable and that one day we can live in a society where we don't have to see these things happening. And that's where prevention comes in. So,
I love that. And exactly, it's like how we were even just going through that list of a fire hydrant of terms that we cover in the services we work with. As you guys are like, as we were talking, it's so many of those things intersect in different ways, and so many of them are connected by that violence prevention. And so, when we're talking about prevention, what does it actually mean? I mean, and this is something that we define a lot in our presentations. And I think you and I probably have it drilled into our heads by now. It is stopping violence before it starts. That is the definition of violence prevention, tackling the root causes of violence prevention. And I think within our agency, the way that we kind of sometimes separate our services by the prevention team and then intervention, everyone else. And I think they really intertwine so much. And so Jen, I was wondering if you could kind of explain a little bit the kind of a breakdown between primary, secondary, tertiary prevention and how those intertwine in the work that we do and the issues that we're trying to prevent.
this is where I put my public health hat on because I feel like this also, was drilled into me during my master's of public health. But really, the differences between primary, secondary, and tertiary, and they sound very academic, right? But they're easy to understand. And like KP was saying, it really shows that our whole organization encompasses all of these things. So really primary prevention is like was what was said, stopping violence before it ever occurs, right? And that's the goal. We want to stop it before it escalates to a situation that we can't control or is not easily as easily control. So that's where our team focuses is on primary prevention of community education and outreach about healthy relationships, right? So if you can recognize the signs of an unhealthy relationship and a healthy relationship, then you hopefully won't have to face the consequences of being in an abusive relationship. So it's really doing that strengths-based intervention. We're not all, scary doom and gloom. It's all about the strengths-based of how can we cultivate healthy relationships and how can that be the norm. And then secondary prevention is being there to respond once violence has happened. So that is where our hotline specialist comes in. We have a 24/7 hotline, and we have our amazing advocates who are there to answer the door if someone comes to the office and says, "This happened to me," right? We have our amazing shelter staff who are helping survivors flee from violence. Our advocates help with court and hospital accompaniments. Our amazing child advocacy center, right? We have all of these teams that are there for the response, being there once it happens. And then our tertiary, that's even helping survivors of violence in the long term, right? So that's so that it doesn't happen again. It's a vicious cycle that happens often. So that's when our trauma therapists can come in. Those support groups, the peer-to-peer learning of being like, hey, I made it out on the other side. Like, here's how, and like I know how it is, and I'm here to offer support. You're not alone. And just that basic need support, especially in so many cases of domestic violence, we and sexual assault, we hear the thing that, well, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just leave the situation? That's something that I hope we can break down throughout the series of this podcast of just being like, it is so difficult sometimes for people to leave a situation, especially if the person who's abusing you is your financial tie to everything, right? If they're providing, if you have children with them, it gets really difficult and entangled. And so that basic need support of shelter, food, housing, when you break off a relationship like that that's so intertwined, often our survivors need that basic need support. And so those are kind of the responses that we have to violence and the different tiers. So you can really see that, you know, really laws is all about prevention in so many different ways, but we're hoping that with this podcast, with continued community conversations, that we can really turn the tide of, hopefully we work ourselves out of a job, right? That's the ideal of like, hopefully we don't have to have an imminent danger shelter in Loudoun County. But unfortunately, right now we're very busy and all of our departments are very busy. And I think that's where it takes a community. It takes all of us to respond, especially in that primary prevention. So yeah.
I appreciate that, Jen. Yeah, I think it's interesting, yeah, like how you were talking all these different levels of intervention, but also and at the same time prevention and how we're working in this community. And as you said, there's this question that we hear a lot of, "Why don't you just leave?" Like, or "Why didn't you fight back?" a lot of
Mhm.
times. And that's kind of the point of this podcast here is that education and awareness and prevention. The prevention goes along with that education and awareness and knowing, and we'll talk about this throughout the podcast and as we have different guests on, and we'll even include some law staff members on here so they can speak more to the impact that they're seeing in the community, but it has such an effect on people and that basic need support that they need when they come out of a relationship. On average, it takes someone 7 times to leave an intimate partner violence relationship. And like you were saying, it's, if you're financially dependent on that person, and you get out of that situation, what are you going to do? And that is where I am so thankful to work at an organization where we are that organization that can come in and say, "We will help you. We know what to do. We can get you prepared for that." And we are very busy. It is very clear that domestic violence, sexual assault, all of these issues that we are working with, they are not going away. And as much as we would love to work ourselves out of a job, it doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon. And so I I think it's so important for us to talk about those root causes. And so, Jen, if you can kind of explain a little bit why we focus on the root causes of violence when we're out in the community. And, we could be focusing on here's the rates and the statistics, don't do it. But, kind of why do we even talk about, gender stereotypes, consent, bystander intervention? How is that actually preventing violence in some way?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question and something that is really near and dear to our prevention team's hearts is really balancing the narrative, right? So much of what this field has tried to do in the past of like preventing violence and even society puts it on the victim, right? It puts it on the person experiencing violence to be like, why don't you just leave? Why didn't you fight back? All of these things puts that it on the person. And I think we really have to shift the narrative and balance it out of like there is a victim and there is a perpetrator. So on our prevention team, we really strive to prevent not only victimization but perpetration. So when we're in the elementary schools, right? We start in the elementary schools and we're talking about body safety. It's not just how to keep yourself safe, it's how to be a good person, right? It's how to check in with your friends when you're playing with them. It's how to read nonverbal cues. It's how to emotionally regulate so that you're not lashing out. So
Mm.
I think tackling those root causes, earlier the better, right? Earlier in the life course, the better, but we're all working on those skills throughout our whole lives. But tackling those root causes of violence is so important there's social inequities that are driving the causes of violence, right? There's racism, sexism, homophobia. Really examining those gender stereotypes is a huge part of reducing violence in relationships. Yeah, like I said, with the emotional regulation or receiving a no, what happens when we receive a no? Do we lash out or do we respect people's boundaries? Boundaries and consent, huge, right? So it's way easier to stop those root causes of violence rather than waiting for it to occur and then trying to intervene, which I think society does. Society, especially here in the US, we're really good at responding once it happens, but we wait until something big happens. And we're trying to measure and do the things that aren't happening. We're trying to measure all the times that an assault did not occur or didn't say a sexist joke or all those things. So it can be kind of hard, right? Maybe we talk about like measuring our impact, and it's hard to see the trends moving in a positive direction because it takes years. So
Mhm.
lots of things in the future. What are some things in the future that we'll be talking about on Pip, our cute little podcast?
I know. I want to just go pip like every time I think of it. But and I even think like as you're talking about the root causes, I was like, Jen, we could dedicate an entire episode to every one of
Yeah.
those root causes. We'll see if we have that many in store for ourselves. But I think we'll definitely be talking about things like healthy relationships, how you were saying consent and boundaries, bystander intervention, as well as kind of the more taboo topics. So, healthy masculinity. I will go ahead and say it now. If we ever say the phrase toxic masculinity on this podcast, it is to put more shame on that word and to encourage people not to use the word toxic. Really, again, how we're talking about strengths based, shifting that norm to that healthy masculinity focus. Social media trends, things we're seeing on social media that especially our youth and our young adults are being exposed to. Pop culture, what's going on in the news and pop culture, like different TV shows and movies. So things I'd like to always kind of throw out are things like Euphoria or heated rivalry, kind of those shows and how one may show more unhealthy behaviors and one's a little more healthy. So different ways that these topics that we address are being shown and displayed in social media and pop culture, just gender stereotypes, community safety, conversations in general on how you were saying all these different causes of violence and how we as a community, we with laws and just even everyone in general can act to prevent those acts of violence. And I'm really excited for us to have a lot of future conversations with guests. We will definitely talk with our own staff members about the roles that they play at laws and the things that they do in the community, the survivors they work with, and even others around the community. I don't want to like name drop anyone yet, but definitely people from different organizations from around the country that are working in similar roles, whether that is with college sexual assault prevention or bystander intervention and self defense, especially for women and empowerment self defense. So, just lots of great conversations ahead in the future on ways that we need to be aware of and recognize how you were saying, Jen, earlier, not just these physical acts and these extremes that we're thinking of when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault, but those subtle little instances that we're seeing, like sexist jokes? How can we recognize that and intervene in in a safe way that educates others and hopefully moves towards ending violence in the future? So, really excited for that.
Yeah, there's a lot that we're excited about in the future. And we want to have this podcast as a way to really just have this conversation in the forefront, right, of everyone's minds. And because it does affect everyone. It's domestic violence and sexual assault is in every neighborhood. It reaches every demographic. And so I think it's really important that we highlight these conversations. So lots of exciting things in the future. We'll also dedicate some time to just do general laws updates and news. We'll keep you in the loop of what's happening at laws. One thing we're really, really excited about is our new shelter. And we are building a new shelter and community services center. So this spring, Laws reached a really major milestone in its capital campaign, and that was thanks to the support of Loudoun County, the Podmore Charitable Foundation, and so many other generous community donors who really understand and see the need. Like we said, this work is not slowing down, right? We need to keep up. And so Laws secured more than 9.4 million towards its 11.6 million goal. Amazing. So we're one step closer to expanding those life-saving services for survivors. And last year alone, Laws served more than 1,000 Loudoun residents with shelter, advocacy, therapy, legal, and more. So, like we said, it's unfortunately a growing need, but we need to meet that need so that we can reach survivors in the community before things escalate, right?
Yeah. And that's yeah, it's insane sometimes when I hear the number, like, more than 1,000, I'm like, I can't tell if that sounds low or high, honestly, because it sounds like a scary number, and it's like thinking 1,000 souls being affected by that and having to be put in, or moved into our shelter, one of our hotels. But it's also this reassuring sense of those people know who we are, they know where we are, and they know that we can provide those services. And we want to extend that throughout the county. So everyone is aware that we are here to help, and definitely excited for our new shelter to be built. It's going to be able to have for us to serve so many more clients, and really extend our services and our reach within helping Loudoun County. So I'm excited for that. I would like for us to kind of wrap up a little bit and doing our own little prevention pop quiz, Jen, if that's okay. And just kind of asking each other a question that we've kind of had on our mind, or maybe it's something that we just want people to know, or just to even kind of consider. But so my question for you, my little pop quiz question is, what's one green flag you wish everyone knew?
Oh man. Yeah. So we do a lot of like red flag, green flag, yellow flag with like our teens and things like that. And I think about this a lot actually. And I think for me, we talk about boundaries and consent in every relationship, not just romantic relationships. So I even think about this with my friends. But one green flag to me is like good pacing. Like to me, it's really important to just like have boundaries on how often you see each other, how deep you get into conversations, like just how it feels comfortable for both parties. And so I think there's the romantic ideas of like love at first sight, you fall in love and, then you're with each other 24/7. And I think just having like the autonomy to do things apart and to, you know, have lots of different friends and, being able to spend time outside of your partnership it's always a good thing for both parties. So that's a green flag for me.
Mm, that one, definitely. It sounds like you've been reading up on 10 signs of a healthy relationship, right?
Maybe. Yeah, I might
Exactly.
have those memorized a little bit. So we're doing a workshop tomorrow on it, so it's on my brain. KP, I know you are, the activist of our duo. So what is one social norm that you'd love to see changed or dismantled?
I think a big thing with mine is like a lot of the gendered social norms. So for me, it would really be the idea of emotions surrounding men and young boys, and this idea that men can't cry and that boys can't emote, they can't talk about their feelings. That is what I would love to dismantle. I think that, a lot of times when we do our work, we talk about like victim and perpetrator, survivor and perpetrator. And I think the work that we've even done, especially with kiddos and young boys, has really kind of changed my perspective into, kids with problematic sexual behaviors or kids that were not taught consent and boundaries and having a little bit more grace for them. And so I think what comes along with that grace is also having grace for emotion around boys. And there's this idea that men have to police each other and keep each other inside the man box, which I know we will talk about on one entire episode that was really made famous by Tony Porter in A Call to Men. But just this idea that men can't emote, they can't express their feelings, or the only way that they can is through anger and violence. And so I just really would love to normalize just and just emotional intelligence for everyone, regardless of gender. I think being able to change and dismantle that social norm is one huge step towards actually preventing violence. So yeah, let the people feel, let a boy feel
Yes.
and just, yeah, let him cry. I'm always supportive of a good cry in therapy.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Yeah, and that just I think that's not something that we can just dismantle by ourselves, right? And that's what I'm really looking forward to as we have, guests come on is of involving men and boys in this conversation, right? And yeah, I just think it's going to take all of us to dismantle those norms. So, we're really excited. We have a lot of exciting things planned for topics. But we also wanna hear from, the audience, from you all. So if there's questions or on topics or episodes, ideas that you have, we are very open to them. If you are an expert in your field and you wanna join, please let us know. But you can reach us at preventionoutreach@lcsj.org is our email. You can also follow along on our social media. Our Instagram is @lawslcsj. And then our Facebook and LinkedIn, you can find us at Laws, Domestic Violence, and Sexual Assault Services. And then KP, what if something comes up where we, maybe there's an urgent situation or someone discloses abuse to you or you just need to be in touch with Laws. How can you get in touch with us?
yeah, so that 24-hour hotline that you kind of mentioned earlier, Jen, that is the way to get in touch with us. That is 24/7, 365. There's always an advocate, not a robot, a real person that is going to be there to answer the hotline and talk with you. And that is not just for survivors, that is for anyone that is looking for information, people we call secondary survivors. So those that maybe are close with someone that has experienced domestic violence or a form of violence and you need support as well. So, any questions or resources you're looking for, our 24/7 hotline is 703-777-6552. And then if you have any just regular general questions, admin questions, if you have questions about donations and things like that, you can call our community services center office. That's just the main line, that'll take you to our main person that's gonna be answering that day, and if you need to talk to a specific department, they will direct you there. And that line is 703-771-3398.
Thank you so much, KP. Yeah, we're really excited, like we said, about this podcast. Thanks for joining. We are hoping to have these episodes out monthly, so please follow along. And we're excited to, get these conversations started. So we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you guys so much, and yeah, you'll hear from us shortly.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.